Reagan's public relations department used to whine and complain that the West Coast was a place where everybody blamed America first, liberals on the West Coast. There's some truth to that, but and some justice in the complaint. But they didn't really care as much as they pretended they cared, because the liberal President JFK was the person who was most likely to get blamed first, and that they thought was great. Noam Chomsky hooliganizes against recognizing JFK for his spontaneity, his understanding, his intelligence, his wisdom, and his intuition. He glosses right over the fact that JFK made a spontaneous call to parchments to have Martin Luther King released. Now, there's some truth to the idea that Kennedy was a little bit befuddled about what was going on. He, after all, ended up in the clutches of his assassins. He complained that Martin Luther King's movement was making it embarrassing to negotiate with the Russians. As if the Russians had something to gain from seeing Martin Luther King's movement affirmed. I think JFK knew better, but he was trying to grapple with his brother's crisis of right-wing chauvinism. The call to the parchments to get King out was done behind Bobby Kennedy's back, and he was reputed to have been angry. Now, what happened in Vietnam is that the right-wing extremists, Kennedy was out of the way. I think anybody who believes Kennedy would have distanced himself from the youth conscience or been ineffective in persuading young people to stick with public service and stay off of drugs and rock and roll and so on, has missed the boat in common sense. But the extremists in Vietnam had in mind undermining America's moral reputation. That's why they did it. We've seen from January 6th, the insurrection, they want to destroy America. They have allies with some very extreme imposter groups. And what they did was that they went into Vietnam in order to wreck America's moral suasion. And they worked their way into high command, and they continued to pull these kinds of moves. They trying to incite anybody who has a grudge against America. Anybody can see that that's true. And that's not really what Reagan's henchmen were whining about, because the people who are in danger from incitement by the bigots of sociology are the people who believe that America is perfectible, people who realize that Russia doesn't have anything to gain from seeing Martin Luther King's movement affirmed and embraced. Well, I tell you that I have a couple of influences. This book came out, it was Kennedy's slogan in 1960. And there was a Special Armed Forces edition. He was the editor of the Southern Review. This is on war stock paper, but very influential book. I picked it up and read it and really was moved deeply by its polemic. Came out in 42. I used to read this as a child. I believe that there's truth to the myth of Abraham Lincoln, that we are what we say we are. We are what we want to believe about us. I know that there are scholars who like to um, torture the memory of Abraham Lincoln, say he was dishonest, and he was a bigot. He's not around to defend himself. But what we know is that he ended slavery. I don't think he did it because he didn't want to. I think he did it because he did want to. And one of the things that's never do well about the New Yorker scene is that they can't bring themselves to question anything honestly. For example, they consider it okay to preach that Yoko Ono is within reason to torture innocent people and kill them, promoting her psychotic ideas with the help of UW dialectical. That they're not brave enough to look at the record concerning James Garfield. His inaugural address against racism in America was 18 years before Plessy versus Ferguson, and he was killed over the 14th Amendment. They say it was no consequence of this. A very important American leader died. You won't find a single person in the NAACP who cares about Elijah Lovejoy when they can bang on about the monolithic abuses of the tyrannical Abraham Lincoln towards the emancipated. The truth is that a lot of us have been instinctively drawn into protection of those around us. We don't have to be lectured. Martha Gellhorn wrote to me once. She said, racism is presumably incurable. Laws have to be created to restrain racists. That's right, but it's not genetic. Some people are instinctively anti-racist. They don't need to be lectured about it. And they can be tricked into looking stupid. If you waste your time doing that, if you waste your time banging on that Elijah Lovejoy, even though he was killed for being an abolitionist, probably had um, sympathies for the Southern man or something, you know. It allows you to do the sort of wargaming, dirty deals that Seattle pulled at the University of Pittsburgh with the Schulman heist crowd. You know, we talk about vying for recognition out here on the West Coast. You don't vie for victim status by poisoning people. It's retarded. Yeah, you're not supposed to use the word retarded, right? I use it proudly because it was used to describe a girl who I love. There's more efficient medical terms that can be used. Okay, well, that's fine. You know, for me, it's just a term about someone I love. So I don't see all the hyper idealism of the licky chops and UW dialectical shining abundantly in pronouncing that Russia will be the beneficiary of King's civil rights movement's triumph in America. I think the right to vote was very persuasive and on the minds of people like John Lewis and Martin Luther King. When I say instinctive anti-racist, I remember Ralph Abernathy reaching out his hand and grabbing mine the minute he saw me. He didn't. His hand was on its way to touch me the minute he sensed my presence, and it was like being held in the hand of the sweet kiss of the vocal cords of Luciano Pavarotti. He had a beautiful grip in his hand. Anybody who ever held Ralph Abernathy's hand knows what I'm saying. He held my hand with tenderness and resolve, instinctively part of the Brotherhood of Man. It's quite an expression, isn't it? When's the last time you heard it?